All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. Um, so today the other day we mostly just scratched the surface as far as talking about Nicomachean ethics, just kind of laying the groundwork. If you recall, we talked about Aristotle's idea called the golden mean, right? Which means virtue comes in the middle most of the time between two different extremes. So he used the example that we talked about the other day. It was the example of courage, right? Courage is the middle point between being too reckless and being a coward, right? That's you can kind of see how being courageous would be right in the middle of those two extremes. Um, we had that discussion about we had that discussion about what would you do in the case in which you see somebody getting robbed on the street. Right? Would you act? I think the person was 7 foot tall, maybe not. Right? If it looked like you could reasonably do something about it, then yes, that would be the courageous thing to do. Probably the coward point, the coward thing to do would be to walk away and do nothing, or to just sit there and observe it and do nothing, not even just walk away. So we kind of laid the groundwork for the entire book as far as what he's going to, for as far as what he's doing. So today we get a lot more in depth as far as like different other ideas that he is going to introduce. We're going to talk today about the idea called temperance. Temperance mostly involves pleasures of the body. So we need the being temperate is the middle point between being gluttonous and not indulging at all. So this is going to be a really interesting thing to discuss, especially in the context of talking about things like addiction. We're also going to talk a little bit today about generosity, how generous is too generous, how prodigal is too prodigal, how stingy is too stingy. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today as well. Before we get too deep into the weeds, there's one thing from the other day that I did not get to mention. So let's go ahead and do that. That's in the book one of Nicomachean Ethics. Let me see if I can find you a page. Okay, page 10. Let's take a look at page 10. Do some close reading. So, book 2 is where Aristotle laid out most of his groundwork as far as thinking about the golden mean and the middle way. Book 1 is kind of where he was talking about we become virtuous by developing good habits. This is something that we can obtain ourselves if we work at it. This is a similar idea to what I mentioned the other day whenever we talked about Homer and the ancient Greeks with Homer. Um, this idea that they had in living a good life is how well you succeed at your societal role. And there's a concept that he mentions in this paragraph we're getting ready to read called being at work. So if you take a look at that paragraph at the bottom of page 10, we'll read that paragraph. He says, but perhaps to say that the highest good is happiness is obviously something undisputed, while it still begs to be said in a more clear and distinct way what happiness is. Now, this might come about readily if one were to grasp the work of a human being. Just as with a flute player, a sculptor, or any artisan, and generally with those to whom some work or action belongs, the good and the doing it well seem to be in the work. So too it would seem to be the case with the human being, if indeed there is some work that belongs to one. But is there some sort of work for a carpenter or a leather worker, while for a human being there is none? Is a human being by nature idle? Just as for an eye or a hand or a foot, or generally for each of the parts, there seems to be some sort of work, ought one also to be set down some work beyond all these for the human being? But then what in the world would this be? The living seems to be something shared in even by plants, something peculiar to humans is being sought. Therefore, one must divide off the life that consists in nutrition and growth. Following this would be sort of life that consists in perceiving. This seems to be shared in by a horse and a cow and by every animal. So what remains is some sort of life that puts into action that in us that has articulate speech. Of this capacity, one aspect is what is able to be persuaded by reason, while the other is what has reason and thinks things through. Since this is still meant in two ways, one must set it down as a life and a state of being at work, since this seems to be the most governing meaning. If you take a look at the glossary in the back of our book, being at work is actually defined. This is a pretty key concept. Page 202. Page 202 is where being at work is defined. The editor of our book says being at work is the central notion in all of Aristotle's philosophy, the activity by which anything is what it is. To understand any of Aristotle's inquiries is to grasp the centrality in it of being at work. In the metaphysics, everything that is derives from and depends upon the things that have their being only by constant activity. Scroll down a little bit. In the Nicomachean ethics, everything depends upon the idea of an active condition can be formed by a deliberately repeated way of being at work. And that can in turn set free the being at work of all the human powers for the act of choice. Let me put this in layman's terms, okay? Being at work. His idea here is, again, you don't become virtuous just from studying this. You don't become virtuous just by conceptualizing it. You become virtuous by doing it. That's what being at work means. Simply just do it. Like the Nike logo, right? Just do it. It's an idea that as human beings, we are creatures that are meant to have some type of purpose, even. Right? We aren't just meant to lay around and watch Netflix all day. Right? Maybe that's good for a while. I see. Hannah's giving me a little grin. She said that doesn't sound too bad, right? Yeah, we're not meant to do that. We're meant to kind of constantly be in a state of being at work, doing something, having a purpose. I know just from my own experience, I don't know if the rest of you guys kind of feel similarly. Like whenever I'm off for an extended period of time, like our couple of weeks for snow, even in the summertime, whenever I'm off for an extended period of time, first week or two, I'm happy as a bee. Do nothing, just waste away. I'm a big gamer, right? So I'll get into a game or something, watch some shows. But after a week or two, I really start feeling discontent, and I'm ready to get back into doing something productive. I'm not the type of person who can be off for long without feeling like I'm just wasting my time. I sometimes wonder if I'll ever retire for that very reason, because I think if I retire, I'll get too bored. So, yeah, it's this idea that this is central to human happiness. We have to have a purpose. We have to constantly be moving towards something. Motion is an important aspect in all of Aristotle's philosophy. He talks about it in his book, The Physics. But everything is motion, if you think about it, including constructing our character. Time is motion. Time is going from one point to another. Space is motion, which we get in our car and we go from one place to another. Likewise, ethics is motion, where we don't get there quickly with ethics. It takes a long time of being at work, developing good habits. What do you guys think of this idea? Are you in agreement that it's part of human nature almost to want to constantly be doing something, to have that purpose? Or do you think, or would you be fine with the life of sitting around watching Netflix all day?
I consider myself a compulsive overachiever, so no, I would not be okay with. I like a couple snow days, but then that's it. I don't think I could deal past that.
Right. We had one too many snow days, especially recently. But some of the rest of you, Ariana, I saw that you were shaking your head. So do you think that you would be discontent? I think you're muted.
Yeah, I couldn't do that.
Right. How long do you think you could get away with it before you would start to get itchy?
A couple days.
A couple of days. Yeah, Hannah, you were giving me your grin a minute ago. You think you would be okay with watching Netflix 24/7?
Not 24/7. I know by the time the snow days were over, I was ready to get out of the house. So
Right. Yeah, I was this past Monday. I was pretty sleepy because my sleep schedule was messed up. But other than that, I was happy to get back into the swing of things.
yeah.
Yeah, this is it, right? This is part of who we are as human beings. Aristotle's kind of contending, right? We're not happy creatures unless we're always in a state of motion, towards working towards something. And what better thing to work at than our character and who we are as a human being? What more important thing than that could we work towards? So again, the fundamental notion of this whole book is you can perfect yourself. You can at least come pretty close to perfecting yourself with good habit and especially habits. Right? Develop good habits. Develop habits in a way where you will always go in the mean and not towards the extremes. That's not something that you do overnight. It's something you almost got to work your whole life at doing, but you can get there, according to Aristotle. It's a lot radical different. That's all very radically different than even like what Christianity would later say, right? Christianity would say we're incapable of doing this. It takes the grace of God to allow us to overcome sin and our frail human nature. Aristotle was writing before the birth of Christ. Okay, so he thought that you could do this yourself. So we will keep putting this idea to the test as we progress through the book. So I would be remiss if I wouldn't have mentioned that idea before we got moved any further. So just a couple of just reminders. So remember in book 2, we talked about just this idea of the middle way in general. Some things, we ended class last time with the notion that some things you cannot have a middle way on. Like if something is naturally, like if something is just naturally a vice, you can't have a middle way in a vice. So like cheating on your partner, right? Like there's no middle way in doing that. It's something that's always wrong. Aristotle's quick to kind of lay that out there. It's kind of an interesting transition because as we start book 3, he starts with this really interesting discussion on voluntary versus involuntary actions. Voluntary versus involuntary. Let me pull my screen up here. I actually have some thought experiments I'm going to give you. So let me type. I will usually type some notes in the chat. Voluntary versus involuntary actions. So he starts this discussion with this idea of like moral culpability, like how responsible are you for certain actions? Okay, so in general, if it's something that you deliberated on, if it's something that you chose of your own free will, that is a voluntary action that we would do. An involuntary action is something that we might do under pressure, under coercion, maybe physical coercion, economic coercion. Think about lots of awful things that happen to people. They do it not because they want to, but because they do it under coercion. Even something like biological coercion plays a part here. So to kind of put this idea into practice, let's see. So let's put this idea into practice by talking about addiction first. Okay. So think about somebody like a drug addict, right? A drug addict probably got there at first with some bad choices, right? And even sort of taking drugs, and over time you develop bad habits that cause you to keep doing it. Your body, but eventually it gets to a point where if you're truly addicted, that you start to develop extreme withdrawal symptoms. If you try to remove yourself from that, it can sometimes such symptoms can land somebody in the hospital. That's why whenever somebody goes to rehab to try to get clean, right? It's often a very painful and grueling experience. You have to get clean chemically before you can get clean mentally. Um, so a question here was even like how Aristotle would frame this. How responsible would that person be for their addiction? Right. So maybe we can maybe there's a point in which that person would no longer be responsible for their addiction. I'm throwing that out there. Right? They're responsible for getting into the habit, but maybe there's a point where they're no longer responsible. I don't know. Well, we can put this idea to the test. Looked like you had something to say there, Mandy. What was you going to say?
Well, it's just the same thing as if, you have a drunk driver. They don't mean for the accident to happen, but they're still the one that chose to drink, and you do lose control over addictions. I'm going to be the old bird, but I'm 46 years old. I've never touched marijuana in my life. A drug or a substance cannot take control of your life unless you make the decision to start them. Don't start them. It'll never happen.
Right? They call certain drugs like marijuana gateway drugs, right? For that reason.
Yep. It's the baby drug that ends up ruining your life, and the only way you can guarantee that you never give it the power to do so is don't touch it.
What do some others think about this? When does responsibility end, or does it ever end? I'm going to call on you, Jordan. You're minoring in this, so I'm going to pick on you. What do you think, Jordan?
I don't know, because I'm kind of two minds about this, I guess. I mean, on one hand, when it becomes like a full-blown addiction, it's an illness, and it's not really like you can't just stop it. In some situations, it's not even safe to stop it, like cold turkey. Um, um, but I also think that, like Mandy said, you are responsible, I mean, for initially deciding to take it in the first place. And I mean, you have to be held responsible for your actions. If you do something like, you know, if you do something like get behind the wheel of a car and crash into some innocent family and kill them, somebody has to be held accountable for that. I mean, there can't just be no consequences, or I mean, I don't think there can be. I don't know. This is something that I have to think about.
Yeah, like I think most people would argue that if you kill somebody drunk driving, right, that you are responsible for that. It's not something you intended to do, but nonetheless, you are responsible for it. The question is how closely related is something like addiction to that? Um, are we making a false equivalency here?
Maybe, because I mean, not all like drunk drivers are alcoholics.
They might just do it one evening, had one too many at the margaritas or something.
And I don't know, because I mean, I think sometimes like dependence on like a substance can lead to somebody committing crimes. But I mean, there's a difference between holding somebody accountable for their crimes versus holding them accountable for having an addiction. But should the fact that they have an addiction factor into how we approach their accountability for such crimes?
I think you have to be empathetic regardless. I mean, we all make decisions in our life that sometimes have lifetime consequences. Sometimes that addiction is just that. So I think you have to have empathy for people as far as, you know, being morally concerned for them as a person, seeing them as a person, not just seeing them as an addict. There's a lot to be said for that, but there's still a level of accountability for what they do, intoxicated or on the substances that they chose to do.
Yeah, here's a question that we can kind of use as a thought experiment. Um, a student, so the thought experiment here, a student has built a habit of cheating over the years. At what point does that student become responsible for that and they're not just addicted to cheating? What do you think about that one? They're always responsible, right, Mandy?
You're not addicted to cheating. I think so many times people, it's one of our number one things. People are just so victims and maybe play the victim card. I'm addicted to cheating. I've been doing it since I was 2. Then stop. Just stop.
Maybe we can think of a better one here, okay? Because that one is not very good. What about something like, let's see. Let's say that you rob a bank, okay? But you rob a bank because somebody tells you that I'm gonna kill your kid if you don't go rob this bank for me, or I'm gonna kill some other loved one or something like that. So let's say somebody says, if you don't go to this, I'm going to harm somebody close to you. Okay, is that person who chooses to then go rob the bank, is that person then responsible for that action?
I think it depends on the circumstance, I guess. You know, I mean, if it's a legit life or death situation, you know, let's just say, Professor Yeager, you're there outside the bank and you're there with your wife. Somebody puts a gun to her head. You know, it's either rob the bank or save your wife. I mean, you could plead insanity. You could plead self-defense. You know, I don't know. I don't know what I would do if it was my child. You know, I would want to think that morally I would find another way, but if I thought it was break the law, break a rule, or save somebody's life, the law's going down. Yeah, I mean, it just is.
Mm-hmm. Right? So in that case, you have to decide for yourself which is the greater good. What about some of the rest of y'all? Would the bank person, would the right thing to do in that case be to be like, I'm not going to play this game with you?
I mean, to be fair, if it's robbing a bank, at the end of the day, that's just money compared to just getting somebody killed. I mean, it would be different if they was like, would you rather, like, I shoot your wife or you go shoot a random person? I feel like that's more of an, I don't know how to explain it. I feel like that's more of a, like, reasonable thing. Because if you're, like, I'm going to rob a bank before I would have anybody killed that I'm close to. Because at the end of the day, that's still life. You know what I mean?
So let's develop the analogy with that, with what you just said, Lauren. If somebody said, you're going to go kill this person for me, otherwise I'm going to kill so-and-so, would you be responsible for the murder in that case instead of just the robbing the bank?
Yeah, I think so. Because, I mean, I still chose to kill somebody rather than watch somebody I love get killed. So that I would still be responsible for it.
What do some others of you think? would you have a clean conscience if you in that circumstance, knowing that you didn't do it of your own free will?
If it was a matter of a bank, yes, I would not feel guilty at all robbing a bank to save a person. Like she said, it's money. I can rob the bank and turn the money in later or report the crime or whatever. I would never, it's not a fair game to me at all.
What about the murder question, Mandy? What apply it to that? Would you?
No. If you said I had to kill someone, um, no, I would not. Even at that point, I would have to. Thank you, honey. You have a good day. That's okay. Keep it, honey. Thank you. Sorry, guys. No, I could not. Even if it was a complete stranger, they said, you kill this complete stranger or I'm killing your kid, then at the end of the day, I'd have to just put my trust in God and be like, this is in your hands, because at that point, that's a life. That's not something that I would ever be able to do. I don't care who it was. I couldn't just walk up to a random stranger and take their life because I was threatened or whatever to do so.
Yeah, these types of questions have to be weighed by even like prosecutors and things like that in the world of law, right? Like if somebody did do this, um, to what level of degree of murder would they be held responsible, if at all? So this is a more important question than you would think. Um, even about even we're going to get real dark here, but even in thinking about something like rape, okay, yeah, I had a student. I'm not going to mention names or anything, but I'm going to write a paper for me, and she talked about how in the paper that she had suffered through that, and she felt these intense feelings of guilt about it, like maybe it was her fault somehow, right? Of course it wasn't her fault, but nonetheless she felt the guilt for it, and she had gone to different religion. I don't remember which Christian denomination she was part of, but she went to like a minister, and the minister kind of shamed her and told her that maybe if she would have not dressed a certain way or something, that wouldn't have happened to her. Yeah, she wrote about that in her paper. So
Sorry, interrupt for anybody. Avid Christian, absolutely not. Disagree, don't know who you talk to. Inappropriate. Permission denied. No, no, no.
mm-hmm. Yeah, so agreed, Mandy. Like I told you guys before, I'm a Roman Catholic, and you have, in order to sin, it takes some kind of voluntary free choice on your part. So something like that, at least within Catholic theology, would not be considered to be such. But nonetheless, it's something that she struggled with, and it's such a shame that she didn't get any good counseling amid that. Like we had a nice conversation about it after I read her paper. I was like, no, you're not responsible for that. Don't even think that. Okay. So something like that, even this question of voluntary versus non-voluntary comes up. Aristotle puts his own spin on this. He doesn't just raise the question, he puts his own spin on it. Let me see. Need to mark my pages better. Let's see. Yeah, Aristotle's spin on it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier with addiction. Like if it's his kind of stance is if it's something that is bodily, like something to do with pleasures and pain and things like that, then he's more skeptical, kind of like what Mandy was saying earlier, right? Aristotle himself is more skeptical that you have responsibility in certain situations like that, like alcoholism, for instance. You can choose to put the bottle down at any time. Let's see. Yeah, if you take a look at page 44, there's a nice quote at the end of that paragraph. This is something that I think is especially true. Right before it says chapter 5, he says, in most people, a distortion seems to come about by the action of pleasure, since it appears good when it is not. So people choose the pleasant as good and avoid the painful as bad. So again, he is more skeptical in the case of something like that you would have more responsibility and culpability for that than for something like that compared to something like being sexually assaulted. That's a completely different ball game. Another question that arises with this, then we'll move on to a different subject. Another question that arises about this is ignorance. Like, how much can being ignorant of something elude you from responsibility for something that happens? So, let me see if I can pull my examples up. So let's say that you're working for a company, okay? Like you're in a high position of power within a company. Let's say that somebody is doing something bad. Like think about like Enron back in the early 2000s, right? Enron took away people who'd worked there for 30 years. The higher ups stole their retirement. Right? So these people were at the end of their careers and had nothing to their name. Let's say there's some type of like fraud or something like that happening. And you're somebody who should have perhaps called on to that, but you just didn't. It wasn't something that you chose not to do. The person did this behavior and they happened to slip it by you. You were ignorant of what they were doing. You could have maybe reported it if you did know, but you were ignorant of it. So the question here, would that person who was ignorant be responsible, just as responsible, if not more so, than the person who committed the fraud? if you should have called it but didn't, but nonetheless you were ignorant about it, should you be held responsible too? I'm going to call on you, Emily. You always have good stuff to say. You've been very quiet this class. You were talking all kinds of all the time last semester.
I was gonna say something a little bit ago, but I forgot. I feel like if I was the person responsible for it and I knew about it, I would feel bad. But if I didn't know about it, it's like, how could you really do anything unless you're aware, sort of situation. Is how I feel about it. Because you can't really do anything if you're not aware of the situation, but you can if you are aware. So I think that's really where.
So you wouldn't feel responsible in that case for if somebody did something like that behind your back?
Like if I didn't know about it, like in that case. But if I did, then I would feel like I would have to do something. Just so people aren't like putting the blame or pointing the finger and being like, no, you had something to do with it. Well, if I didn't know, I didn't know. And I feel that's how anybody would feel, honestly, if they didn't know about it.
What about some of the rest of y'all? Do you agree with Emily? Or do you see that there's some responsibility on the person who didn't know?
I agree.
You think that you shouldn't be held responsible for that?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm going to pose a counter argument to you all then. The word for that's negligence, right? You should have in your professional responsibility caught that very thing. But even though you were ignorant of it, you were negligent in your duties, and that should have been something that came about on your radar. That's I'm not saying I'm right here. I'm just playing devil's advocate. But Emily, I'll pick on you again. How would you respond to that counterpoint? That
like being ignorant to the situation.
Yeah, like you're negligent in your professional responsibility if you did not catch that fraud.
Okay. I would probably, yeah, like if I didn't catch it and it was brought to my attention or I didn't stop it, then yeah, I would probably say, well, yeah, it was brought to my attention. I just didn't do anything. So yeah, I get where you're coming from with that. But if you don't know, you don't know. So how can you do anything if you don't know? But if you do know, yes, you should report it.
Right.
To like whoever you have to. Somebody maybe higher up than you. So yeah, I get where you're coming with that one. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess the point I'm trying it's similar to like if a doctor does a surgery on you and leaves a scalpel inside your body or something, right? They didn't mean to do it. They should have caught the fact that they did. They should have caught that. They were negligent in their duty. Looks like you got something ready to go, Jordan. What do you think?
I don't know. I'm trying to. I mean, I guess for me, it depends, like, on how fallible my ignorance regarding the topic is. How easy would it have been for me to catch it? How, like, is it something like leaving a scalpel in a person's body that, like, should probably...
Yeah,
let's probably check.
Let's say in this scenario you're an accountant, right? So as an accountant, you should see those numbers and know something was up.
Like, I mean, if I have the skill set to be an accountant, And I should, by all, through my knowledge, I should be able to look at those books and tell that there's something wrong. I mean, I guess it depends on how big of an issue there is, and how well trained I am. But I think that you probably do have a degree of responsibility if you have the knowledge to know better, or you're supposed to have the knowledge to know better, and you still fail.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like this, historically speaking, this happened after World War II, right? The Nuremberg trials in Germany. Like you didn't have most of the high-ranking officials in the Nazi regime all killed themselves, right? So a lot of the people in the Nuremberg trials were middle management type people. You knew what was going on, but you didn't do anything about it. You didn't try to report it. You participated in it. So that was a common history, at least, where everybody was held responsible for the things that happened. So it's an interesting question. We spent 45 minutes on it almost. But this is one of the most interesting parts of this whole book, I think. It's kind of just mentioned in a couple of pages. He kind of sweeps it under the rug, but it's a pretty essential part to understanding everything in this book, really. So let's go now to talking about temperance. I think we'll have time to talk about temperance today. I don't know if we'll get to generosity. We might have to save generosity. How about this? I'm going to next class. I was originally going to have you read book 5, 7, and 8. Book 5's enough. We'll save 7 and 8 for a different day. Okay, so by the time we get to book 4, I don't won't be till next class anyway. So I'm going to cut the reading a little bit next class. Just book 5. Okay. I'll send an announcement and announce as such. But at the end of book 3 is where Aristotle talks about temperance. Let's see. So chapter 11, section 11 in book 3 is on page 56. Let's take a look. 56. This is the passage I was looking for a few moments ago. I found it as we were talking. So chapter 11 in book 3. He says, some desires seem to be shared in common, while others seem to be confined to certain people and cultivated. For example, the desire for food is natural, since every being that needs it desires dry or moist nourishment, sometimes both. One that is young and reaching its peak desires sex, as Homer says. But not everyone has a desire for this or that particular sort of food, or for the same sorts, and hence what is desired seems to be our own preference. Nevertheless, it also has something natural in it, since different things are pleasant to different sorts of people. And some things are more pleasant to everyone than any random thing would be. So in the natural desires, few people go wrong and in one direction toward too much, since eating or drinking whatever it may be until one is overfull is to exceed what is natural in amount. And the natural desire is to fulfill one's need. Hence, these people are called greedy guts, since they fill the belly beyond need, and those who come to be that way are people who are too slavish. But many people go wrong, and in many ways, in connection with the pleasures that are confined to certain people. For those who are said to be passionately devoted to such pleasures are so called either for delighting in things they ought not to delight in, more than most people do, or in a way that they ought not. Dissipated people go in excess in all these ways. They too delight in some things they ought not, and they are despicable things. If one ought to delight in some things, they delight in them either more than one ought or more than most people do. It is clear then that excess in connection with pleasures is dissipation and is to be blamed. So whenever we're talking about this idea of temperance, it is, again, whenever he's talking about this, he's mostly discussing pleasures of the flesh, so to speak. So things like sex, right? Things like eating, drinking, being merry, right? Things, all those different things that we all take for granted. Temperance is the middle state in between what he calls dissipation, being too overbearing with it, and the other extreme would be never having it at all, right? Just completely withdrawing yourself from all of those bodily pleasures as a whole. So that's what something we're going to talk about Buddhism later in the class. That's what Buddhism would do. Buddhism would suggest we withdraw from all that, not do any of it at all. Mandy used the marijuana example earlier, right? Like Aristotle, like if we're going to apply this idea of the middle way in temperance, Aristotle might be like, okay, it's okay to smoke some weed, right? But maybe don't do it every day, 3 times a day, right? Maybe like once on the weekend or something. Like you're not going to harm anybody by doing it. That's temperance. That's enjoying a bodily pleasure, but you're not going at it too hard. Likewise, you're not being a prude and never doing it. Temperance is the middle ground there. What do you guys think of this? Same thing for you can apply this to all this stuff, right? Not talk about overeating, right? Like when you go to the Olive Garden and they bring you the endless breadsticks, right? When are you being temperate versus when are you being in excess? I can certainly speak for myself that I'm not very temperate whenever I get the Olive Garden breadsticks. Keep bringing them, right? That's pretty much me. That's why I need to lose about 20 pounds. Okay. But even in things like sexuality, like when do people go too overboard with it, like completely withdrawing yourself from being a sexual person? That would be the lack. Being an addict would be excess, or maybe having a healthy sexual drive or something would be temperance. You guys think he's right? My question here is, do you think he's right about these things? Most of the time, at least. Like, can you think this is something that could be perfected? Like, hey, if I go to the Mexican restaurant, I'll just have one margarita, right? Just to enjoy it. But I'm not going to go past that. Is that a good way to go? Do you think that's possible? What do you think? kind of relate it to, let's use the marijuana to kind of ground it. Okay. Mandy, I don't know if you're there, Mandy. You said earlier that you would never do it, right? So you want to frame that in this context.
As far as the drugs, I personally, this is a little deeper than your question probably, but I personally was raised around it, and I've adopted many children, most of them being born drug addicted. So I've got a strong passion there that a lot of people may not relate to, but for me, it's a no-go. It's not one, it's not maybe, it's not try it once, it's a no. As far as alcohol, I think that depends on the person. You need to be self-aware of yourself. Do you have an addictive personality? Do you have the ability to have a drink at home with your wife or your husband or your best friend, whatever, and that not be problematic? That's a question that only you can answer, and you have to be self-aware and know yourself and choose to make responsible choices from there.
So it depends on what the thing is. Right? But some of the rest of y'all, do you think it's okay generally to indulge in the pleasures of life, but maybe not too much or not too little? Is this something possible?
I mean, we're all going to do it because we're all human, but we, in a sense, have self-control over what we do, whether it be having that one drink or smoking that marijuana, or, you can say, well, one isn't going to hurt, but yeah, you never know where it's going to lead if you do it too much. So it's all about self-control in that sense and how you perceive it.
Self-control can be a slippery slope, right? It's something that you can lose very quickly if you don't watch yourself.
I mean, I don't think that like all pleasures are like equally are like equal. Like, I mean, I think, there's some things that when you do it once, it'll really send you down a bad path. But I mean, I think moderation is good, like in general, but I don't think you can't be moderate with like everything. And I think context matters. Like if you're somebody who has, like, for example, addiction or alcoholism in your family, even taking one drink could be, a slippery slope.
Yeah. Yeah, you went with exactly where I was planning to go with this next. Can you really tell an alcoholic, just have one, right? Do it in moderation. Is that a winning strategy? I think I think it's pretty obvious, right? That in that context, no. Yeah, just it's okay. And I know you got 3 DUIs. You got your driver's license taken away, but yeah, you got to wean yourself, right? You can't just go cold turkey. Like it says, just have 2 glasses of wine instead of your fireballs, right? That's more temperate. I think you guys could see I'm being purposefully exaggerating here, right? Just to show how silly that sounds.
I feel like depending on what it is, some things can change your life for the rest of your life, and not just at the moment.
Okay, how so? Do you have like a example?
Like take drugs for instance. You can touch a drug one time, and it can just lead to worse, to worse, to worse, until eventually you can't get any worse.
right? The smallest of things, right? Drugs is a extreme example, but even other things, right? I mean, you get too addicted to the pleasure, right? And like video games, right? I'm a big video gamer, right? But if somebody is like I have friends who will sit around and play them for 12 or 15 hours a day, right? Like that's clearly a case of overindulgence in the Aristotelian definition. Then they get mad at me because I don't want to join them for 10 to 15 hours a day. I have to work for a living, guys. I don't have time for that. But that's even something like that. You don't think of something like that as being like drugs, but it can be. It can be just as intoxicating. Let's see. Yeah, think about even like all the different psychological disorders that come from this stuff. Think about like eating disorders, for instance. Like anorexia comes about from wanting to go to the extreme in this case with something even like food and never eating at all, or wanting to be perfectly thin, right? Like a lot of these things with temperance, arguably you could fix things like this if you could practice the virtue of being more temperate. What about, I'll use this as an example and then we'll conclude for the day. What about your phones, right? What about your phones? I would hate, there's a thing on your phone called screen time, right? So I don't even want to tell you what mine is. I don't even want to tell you. It's pretty absurd. But even something like your iPhone here, right? Like, what would temperance be for your screen time? How much you scroll every day? How much you watch videos? Throw me a number. What would you guys say would be a moderate amount of screen time? An hour, maybe? What would throw me a ball?
I think realistically, I mean, if you're on it in the morning, checking in with people, sending messages, for me, I'm on my phone early in the morning, late at night, and for Zoom classes. But it's just a matter, look at your production for the day. What did you do today? And if you can't say anything that did not resolve a screen, your time off the screen definitely needs to be way higher. And a lot of times people they get addicted to what's going on social media or in the lives of other people. And it can definitely hinder you in your own life for sure.
So maybe a couple hours a day in your case then, Mandy, early in the morning, late in the evening. Where does it start to become an extreme? Probably what mine says. But how much would be too much? When are you just wasting your life looking at a cell phone?
Once you hit like 6 hours.
See, I at the end of the day, sit down with a piece of paper. What did I accomplish today?
Mhm.
If you don't have a significant, list of things that you did or that occupied your time, what happens is you wake up one day and you've lost your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, and you've given it to a screen looking at everybody else's lives. That's not a good reality that I would be able to look at.
I laughed just now, Ariana, because that's what my screen time app said that I did last week, was the exact number you said. I'm a little bit ashamed of that. That's what it said.
Well, if you're being productive on it, then it's fine. But if you're just sitting there on it and you're not getting anything done, then
I'll blame it on it saying it was a last week during the snowstorm. I'll blame that number for that. So yeah, ask me again next week what it is. I probably won't tell you. I'll probably I might tell you a lie. We'll see. Yeah, I'll plead the fifth. Okay. But yeah, Mandy had a good point. Like something like this, even something like this is extremely addicting, right? And if we don't watch ourselves, if we're not temperate, our whole life can go by before our eyes, doom scrolling on TikTok. Right? So overindulgence is not good. My mother does that. She not with the screen, but with cable news. She sits around and watches MSNBC all day. Like, my parents have always been like super democratic, right? So like they're sitting around all day watching MSNBC, and making themselves miserable all day. I'm like, go for a walk, enjoy the sunshine, get away from MSNBC for a while, Mom. This is an interesting question. It depends person to person. Even within theology, if we're going to go from ethics to theology, it depends on what denomination you're in. It's typically the Roman Catholic way of answering this question. What we just talked about, temperance, right? That's kind of how we approach it. But as we said, temperance has its limits. Sometimes you can't be temperate. All right, guys. So that was a fun class. I enjoyed that. That was a good time. So the other day, I forgot to post the quiz. I got busy with something else. So I will post one on all this stuff we've talked about this week. I'm going to do that right after we're done. Okay, so you'll have a week to do it. And for next time, I'll edit our Boodle show. But for next time, the only extra reading you got to do is book 5. We'll talk about book 4 and book 5 next class. Okay.
I just took the quiz that was on chapter 2, and then I still have a quiz that's due Thursday. So the quiz that you're posting needs to happen before the Thursday quiz?
No, the one I'm going to post today will be due a Wednesday a week from today on the 18th.
Okay. It's material after the Thursday.
Yeah, it's the material we've covered this week on Aristotle.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So we will continue with our deep dive into the book next time. So we'll see you all then.
Have a good day. See ya.
See you guys. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.